Magayigan se palasyaba sobre la nariz cuando veía que no caía fue a buscar otra gallina.
I'm Naomi Shafer, the Executive Director of Clowns Without Borders, and this is our 1st of May event in the Circus. 1st of May is a term for, in the American circus, it's a term for somebody who is new to the circus or in their first season. So right now I'm talking with 3 clowns who went on their first Clowns Without Borders tour this past year. I'm so excited to introduce Josie Mae, Rubin, and Leora Sapon-Shevin. And to start, I'm actually going to have them talk about themselves, do their own intro. So Eric, starting with you, where are you and what made you want to work with Clowns Without Borders?
Yes, I have pretty much always wanted to work with Clowns Without Borders since like when I was still like in embryonic form. I just knew. I'm based in southern Berkeley, right on the border with Oakland. Yeah, and I did my first trip in December with Clowns Without Borders in Ecuador with Josie, who's on this call, and a bunch of other amazing clowns. And it was everything I could have hoped for and more.
Hi, my name is Josie. I am on the Chinook, Multnomah, Clackamas, Tualatin lands, commonly known as Portland, Oregon. And I've always wanted to work with Clowns Without Borders since I started interning for them when I was earning my certificate in nonprofit management about 5 years ago. And so my most recent and my first tour was last December in Ecuador with Rubin, with Eric, and 2 other awesome clowns.
Hello, everybody. I'm Leora, and I live in Tucson, Arizona. And this December, I went on my first Clowns Without Borders tour to the Bahamas. And I've wanted to be a clown since I saw Clowns Without Borders video of a tour of Clowns Without Borders in Greece performing for Syrian refugees. And so that's what set the spark off for me to go down this path. And so this trip was a real dream come true.
Awesome. And so we're going to talk a little bit about like, how did you prepare for your tours and what was hard, what was good? But first I want to hear what was good. And so I'm hoping you can share sort of what I call a golden moment, a moment from the tour that really sticks out and is still like, when you think of what was one of the best parts of the tour, is still one of those pieces that you think about. And also if you could each give just a little bit of context of why Clowns Without Borders was in Ecuador and in the Bahamas, what the focus of the tour was.
I would say the most amazing thing, I mean, so these tours are so incredible, right? It's basically like some kind of reality show, like clown version of like an MTV reality show, like 4 clowns diverge on an apartment in Quito, Ecuador. They create a show together during several days in that apartment and then tour it around the border regions of Colombia and Ecuador. These are the crazy hijinks that unfold. And of course, we were full of drama. We knew we were on camera the whole time. No, it wasn't actually a reality show. But yeah, I mean, it is a unique experience to the world to show up, to meet like 3 incredible artists who have totally different backgrounds and skill sets, and to create an ensemble show, you know, in a tight amount of time. So your creative energy is just like, pa, 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 pa. We're like, what about this song? What about this thing? And, you know, Josie is an incredible juggler, right? So she just, you know, just suddenly was throwing around chickens, and we had a chicken song. And then we actually had the amazing Darina from Javanu, who's a partner on this trip, her clown is a chicken. So it became this migrant journey story, immigrant story of a chicken. And since we were working with Venezuelan refugees, many of whom have walked by foot from Venezuela across Colombia to arrive in Ecuador, given the awful economic situation in that country, we were able to create this specific story. We had great input from our local partner, Jesuit Refugee Services. So it was just awesome. And then they have this tremendous amount of specialty in being able to book these shows in like these amazing cities and towns and neighborhoods all over Ecuador, because they're doing that on the ground work. So to imagine that we were able to accomplish all of this in 10 days, you know, I think we did nearly a dozen shows, you know, for hundreds of kids and families. And yeah, so it was just amazing. And I would say, you know, the best moment by far was our last show. So as with all of these trips, and, you know, one can imagine there were things that popped up that we had to adjust to, such as our van breaking down in the middle of the highway. And so I have this visual of like, we're sitting on the side of the road, all of us, you know, in this beautiful landscape. You have like mountains behind it, but we're just like, huh. And our amazing partner, whose actual name is Washington Taco, that's real, and he's like the best human being ever. But he's working on the van. I can see Josie off in the field, like juggling, and we're all just kind of like, huh. And so we were bummed, right? Because we had to cancel part of our trip, but we ended up doing this show in Quito for this small like home for refugee families, Venezuelan refugee families. And it was this beautiful little room with just folks lining the sides. And at this point, we had melded, right? We've been doing this show. This was like our 11th show. And this audience was just alive. They were full of joy. They had these huge smiles. They were ready to jump in and participate. And we were all just, we suddenly, we knew each other so well after 10 days. I mean, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly at that point, right? You've seen each other, you know, after a 3-show day, the next morning, just everyone, like, this audience was just alive. They were full of, so anyway, long story long, in this final show, we were just like, yeah, like I said, we were bringing in the audience. We were still improvising and creating new parts of the show. But it was just really beautiful to produce that final product and to see how it developed over 10 days. And then just to see this immense amount of joy on the audience when they were like, wow, you guys just made this show from scratch 10 days ago. And I think we all kind of felt that way. So
my golden moment from the tour was actually very similar to Eric's. And I think personally, like just showing up in Quito and being put into this room, like apartment with 3 other clowns and asked to create a show in such a short time frame. It was just like such a creative experience of all of us throwing out these different talents and skills and ideas for a theme around the show. Like Lars, who we were on tour with, had a suitcase with a unicycle and a banjolele, and it just so many, just pulling out things left and right all over this apartment. And we had so much like content to work with within that, and creating our show around immigration and rights and dreams was really relevant for the communities that we were working with, Venezuelan refugees along the borders in Ecuador, and really partnering with SJR, Jesuit Refugee Services, to hear what kind of like content they were bringing in, and then hear the content that we were bringing in and melding it so that it became this really hopeful kind of storyline of a performance. And I think our team melded so well, and working together in creating that was a really golden experience.
And all in Spanish, mind you, right? This is all happening in like fluent Spanish, which was like,
yeah, all in Spanish. And we did have a lot of dialogue and singing and music also in Spanish. And I thought that, you know, coming together as a team of Americans and Mexicans to present this show about connectiveness and community felt good presenting that to the communities we were working with, like Venezuelan refugees and Ecuador, Colombian refugees.
Sure. So we were on a tour doing hurricane relief because there was a Category 5 Hurricane Dorian, that had come through about 3 months earlier. And some islands were untouched, but some islands were just completely underwater. And our first performance was at a shelter. So the shelter was filled with evacuees from an island, one of the islands that had been really wiped out. And so it was this huge gymnasium that had been converted into a shelter, and there were rows of beds everywhere, some on, some up high, some on the floor. And, so if you walk through these aisles, there's people, sleeping or, nursing their babies or on their phones, or kind of talking in these small groups. And it was my first time being in a huge shelter like that. So one of my golden moments was our very first show. We go into the gymnasium, into the shelter, and we have these flyers, and we had been there a few days before doing workshops, so people had seen us come in, but we hadn't really been wearing big costumes or anything. Sometimes we've been using our noses. So we're winding through, and we have these flyers, and we're like, hey, there's a show in about 30 minutes. Are you gonna come? And we're trying to talk to people about the show and be like, oh, it's over there in that tent outside. Yeah, okay, come on. And there were a lot of people who, they're tired. It's like we're in their living room pretty much. It's just like these, and so just this constant string of strangers walking by, and they're like, yeah, I'm napping, or some people were like, yeah, sure. And, a lot of people, they're just exhausted. They've been there for months on end. So we're telling them about the show, but it's a pretty quiet, okay, great, and so we all go out to the car in the parking lot, and we're like, okay, we're gonna get our costumes on, and we put our costumes on, and we start making our parade, from the parking lot, and we're singing a song that Clay wrote, one of the other performers, and we're kind of winding our way back up the stairs, up the front of the building towards the entrance, and we're trying to get people to join in and get them to clap along, and some people are starting to crack smiles, these adults who are sitting on the steps, and we kind of wind in, and these two men, because we're carrying a lot of our supplies, they open the doors for us, and we walk in, and the entire gymnasium bursts into applause and cheers, and it was this overwhelming just wave of joy, and just to experience that and also see it in such sharp contrast, because Clay had done Clowns Without Borders lots and lots of times, but for Meredith and I, it was our first time, and for me, I had seen all these Clowns Without Borders videos, and I was like, wow, can it really be that good? And when we were handing out flyers, I was like, I don't know, I mean, maybe it'll just be a really small crowd, but to walk in and have that wave of people hit us, and we start winding through the shelter, and these kids just come from all sides. They appear out of nowhere. They're flocking on both sides. They're lining up behind us. People who we had just spoken to, who had been just kind of like lying down or like kind of hesitant to get into a conversation with us, were smiling and clapping and cheering us. And it was so wild. And it made me feel, I remember thinking, oh my God, this is real. It's not just in these, promotional films I've been seeing. And so it was really amazing to just experience that switch and experience such a change, and just have this wave of receptive, rolling joy kind of wash over me and everybody else.
Awesome. So we have a question from the audience, and Carlos will ask what was especially hard in a moment. But first, I would love to know, like, what's something you did to prepare for the tour that was especially helpful?
Yeah. I mean, it was, you want to bring your best game, your A game, right? I mean, when we had that first call, and it was so exciting, and you go, of course, and you stalk all your fellow performers and see their awesome videos on YouTube, and you're blown away by how amazing their skills are. So, I mean, for me, I was sort of the music guy. Lars also is an incredible musician. Pretty much everyone can do music. That's the thing. You're like, I'm the music guy, but most of the other clowns also can do that and juggle. So, it's intimidating to be with such wonderful talent. So for me, part of it was just I wanted to learn every kid song they sang in Latin America. I wanted to sort of get all my guitar chops, as tight as possible. And also I rigged this amazing little speaker looper thing, because I do some live looping. So I was rigging up and drilling into my speaker so I could latch this thing around my waist, so that I could live loop and do sort of an interviewee thing with a microphone. As with everything that you prepare for these trips, you end up throwing out half of it when you realize it does or does not work. You end up creating these beautiful things in ensemble. But it was cool. I tried to use it. It also created a tremendous amount of like my entire back and body would like, you have this heavy speaker on your belly and you're like jumping around. It doesn't necessarily work out. So that's part of the learning. You can prepare as much as you want to. At the end of the day, you just have to come with an open mind and be ready to collaborate. So
Awesome.
Yeah, so I did a lot of things to prepare. I think importantly, doing a lot of research on the region I was going to and our partner organization and understanding why we were invited there. I started reading a really awesome book called Learning Service that talks about volunteering abroad and what that impact can have and how to do so ethically. I did personal work in kind of dismantling that white savior complex that can show up sometimes as a person traveling internationally. I juggled a lot before to up my endurance so that I knew we'd be performing like 3 shows a day, that I'd be able to juggle consistently through that. I made a costume. We had like 3 weeks and I just designed a whole new costume and made that and just kind of collected some props I thought would be fun to bring. And yeah.
So I watched a documentary that you sent me about circle play and circle games and about Bahamian music. And I read up a little bit about what I could find about the history of the country and what had happened during the hurricane. And then I think because for me, since I knew that there were so many variables and it was such a new experience, that I wanted to sort of just trust that the work would show up. And I knew that the other people going with me were really experienced performers. And so that felt great to know, and it helped me realize that for me, it felt the most important to do what I needed to do to get grounded before the trip. So I reached out to friends and family and set up times to check in with people. Yeah, and I just tried to think that I can't know what I don't know yet. So I'm just going to try and ground myself to prepare to go with the flow.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I love the different ways you prepared, of sort of Josie taking a really research-based approach, Eric thinking in terms of prop and design, and Leora thinking in terms of like personal development and grounding. And those 3 aspects, I think that's part of why the work of Clowns Without Borders is so rewarding and so challenging, because it takes all of that. It takes all of who you are as a performer, as a person who can be grounded in themselves, and then also as somebody who's willing to be like culturally humble and curious around why we're going to the places we're going, and what that's like to have the privilege to travel and perform for people who are often in a place because they've lost that freedom of movement.
Mm-hmm.
Eric, I know you have to leave in a moment.
Yeah.
I want to very quickly answer something that was hard.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of this was just the same, was the hardness. I mean, when you're on day 8 and you've been speaking Spanish and building a show and driving 10 hours in a bus, you get to a point where you're just, like I said, we're all at breakfast and you're just like, don't talk to me, finding time to take personal space, to clean your outfit. I mean, 3 shows in the same outfit, like sweating. At one point I was like, oh God, something does not smell good and it's me. So, you get to that moment where you're just exhausted, but it's at the same time, because you're so tightly ensemble, it's like, you can lean on people, your co-people, and you just feel held. One last thing I would say, and I have to jump, is just a huge part of this is Naomi and the presence you bring. I think like having been on that first call and you being so attentive to self-care and to us thinking about what we need to ground, I think that really just like, and the joy you bring to this work, I think it just sets the tone. So yeah, I'm just really grateful for you and for this opportunity. So
Josie, are you feeling brave and ready to share something that was hard?
Sure. I think the hardest aspects for me on tour was getting enough rest, especially on 3 show days when we had maybe an hour in between. And it was very hot and sweaty, and just making sure I was taking that time to rest. Felt challenging personally. Um, the travel of the tour itself, we did so much driving, and that took a bigger toll on me than I was expecting. But also we had wonderful moments, like 4 clowns in a van in between tour shows. So yeah, I think those are the main things that were challenging for me.
Yeah, getting rest is hard, and there is especially like so much energy within the team, and in performing there's so much energy that I get from being with an audience that sometimes I have to really remind myself and be a little strict with myself of like, okay, Naomi, now it's time to rest, so that then for the second or third show of the day I can play. Leora, I'd love to hear what was something that was hard for you?
Yeah, I think just to sort of echo what Josie was saying, I think trying to get enough rest when things are really busy. And also there's a lot to process, I think, and a lot of things you're learning, a lot of euphoria, a lot of, for me, there was like a lot of like, oh no, how did I handle that interaction? Was that appropriate? But at the same time, there just wasn't time to think about that stuff. So you had to just be like, yep, I'm just going to keep going. And so that was probably the trickiest part.
Part of what makes the Clowns Without Borders tours, there's always in team, and we work in ensemble, and often very, very quickly, right? We have our calls as a team, but then a pretty short rehearsal period. And I'd love to know what's something that you learned from your team, and either that experience of working with the team, or if there's something you learned from one team member or another. And whoever waves at me first can go.
So specifically, Darina Robles of Bienvenue, who was our team leader, who's a phenomenal clown and human being. I remember one of our first kind of choreography show creation meetings, she just said, believe in the yes, and believe in the ideas that we are putting forward, and like how much power that yes can have. And I think that helped us as a team create the show in such a way that everybody's ideas felt included, and nobody felt like needing to take on like, I am the star of the show. We each had a really delicate balance of our individual moments in that. And I think a lot of that came from just believing in saying yes to new ideas.
Thank you. And Leora, what did you learn from your team?
I learned so much from watching them. So I was on tour with Meredith Gordon, who's Squeeze the Clown, and then Clay Mazing, and both of them are really experienced clowns. Meredith in the hospital, and Clay traveling internationally doing Clowns Without Borders and Emergency Circus. And they both just have such different toolkits available to them. And so watching when they would bring certain things forward, to be like, oh, now is a good moment for me to do my paper bag trick. So just getting to watch how they were interpreting different situations was really great. And also, this was something I learned from Clay, was just Clay would always have his nose on. And so we would just be out at the grocery store, and my mind was sort of off of the performer mode, and Clay would be like, oh, there's a kid, and he was ready to play at any moment. And that was something that I hadn't thought of before, but I think I took the leap from that.
Advice to future Josie would be to really find those moments of rest between shows and navigating that, like adrenaline and experience of being from an audience performing, like eyes on you, and that kind of transition through, okay, now we're off to the next show, finding ways to hold on, decompress, and rest in between those moments. I think also what goes by so fast. And so having that presence in each moment, you are going to be tired and exhausted, and advocate for that space, but also be like present in everything in between performing and traveling, eating, walking around the neighborhood when if you have like a couple hours off or whatever. And yeah, kind of just slow down.
Thank you so much. Slow down. Something that I try to do is after the show, and like my rule for myself is that if we're in the van, I'm having quiet. I try to have quiet time, and so that can be really hard for me. I definitely sometimes have FOMO because the car is full of these incredible funny people, and I know on my last tour of being with Andres Aguilar and Leah Abel, they would like play music and joke all the time, and I had to choose to sort of say, okay, this has to be rest time in the car, also so that I don't get car sick. So Leora, what is your advice to your future self?
I would just say to try and take it easy, and that I can't know what I don't know yet. There's so many variables on a tour. There's so many people that you're going to meet, so much to be thinking about and navigating in any given moment, that I would just tell myself to relax and just go with the flow. And Josie actually reminded me of something about the hardest part of the tour. And I found that the hardest part of the tour was being finished with the tour, because it was so incredible to feel that every day was purposeful, and that I was doing something that I loved and that was of use to other people, and to just have such a narrow, meaningful purpose every single day with people who also loved doing that was such an incredible high. And then once that structure dissolved and the tour was over, and that steep learning curve of just like every day I'm learning something new, useful, that was the hardest part. And that was the part that I wasn't anticipating.
Totally.
Yeah, Josie, do you have more that you want to say about
it just reminded me that at the very end, I was just like bawling my eyes out in the Quito airport, and my flight was like 2 hours delayed, and I was just sitting there crying.
It's real.
Yeah. So coming back, and that's kind of the next question is what's in the I should be able to do this really easily. In the 5 months since you've come back, what's changed, either about how you think about yourself, or also in kind of how you think about the world and global displacement? I know that those are two very big and very different questions. What's changed? I guess what's changed in the past? So much has changed in the past 5 months. Leora, save me.
Yeah. Yeah, the trip really reminded me of how incredible it is to make art in an ensemble with people who have the same passion as you, and who share the same joy doing what they do, and how powerful that is, and how, like what Eric was talking about, it's incredible in such a short period of time what we're able to do when we're focused. And I've found that there have been moments, especially since all the stuff has been going on with coronavirus, where I have been able to enter into moments of clown and get into character and play, and it's been such a source of solace for myself. But then there's also been moments when I haven't been able to access because I've been worried about my income or my housing, and things that are also up in the air. And so it's made play easier and harder in some ways, if that makes sense. Like it's made me realize how important it is, and that sometimes you need help and guidance to access that when the things feel overwhelming.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Josie, what's changed for you, either about how you think about yourself as a performer and a teacher, or or how you think about the world? Just a nice, easy question.
Yeah, just ease right in there. So I think that something I learned, especially having such a short turnaround time for like creating in our first performance of a show, is just to keep creating and creating as much or more than I'm consuming, and have that creative process like come out even if it doesn't feel perfect or right. But to just keep creating, and that like trusting that it'll flow and it'll fall into place as you're creating. Making art with other people is something I've been craving to do more of, as well as now in kind of Corona times, finding ways to tap into those moments of play and being able to just hold space for that in myself, and hope that by doing that, other people can access that as well when I have the capacity to do that.
The mission of Clowns Without Borders is to inspire resilience through laughter, especially for people experiencing crisis. And right now, the world is experiencing this pandemic. And I also feel this tension within myself of both knowing and believing in the power of laughter, and also having moments where I don't have a well of my own funny to share. So yeah, the last piece is really just how for you is laughter a tool for healing, or either for you personally, or again maybe a moment from the tour where you saw laughter and you thought, oh yeah, this is clowning is the right thing to be doing.
Yeah, sorry, I don't have, I'm still kind of thinking and processing that, because it's a really good question, and I think it's the question that all art, like so many artists are asking ourselves, because a lot of job of the arts is to help people synthesize and process the input that they're getting in the world. But right now we're so saturated with input, and we're so saturated with narratives of what's going on, and people are experiencing this very differently depending, structural inequality and all these things. And so I think a lot of our system is being kind of laid bare right now. And so I do feel that clowning comes from a place of vulnerability and wanting to share that with other people and being willing to be vulnerable. But it is an interesting question when it feels like these days there's nothing but vulnerability for everybody, no matter who you are or where you're at with things. And so, yeah, I'm still working on figuring that out too. But the other day I was feeling really self-serious about a problem that I had, and I was using a water pick, and I was like really pensively, flossing my teeth, and I spaced out for a second, and it like fell out of my mouth, and I sprayed myself in the face, and I laughed so hard at that moment. And I was like, clown concept, great, I'm gonna work on this clown video. And so it was just sort of a random moment of piercing my own tension with something ridiculous, and I was like, all right, that was helpful.
Thank you.
Well, initially I started to think about how every audience is going to have a different takeaway of your performance or show, and how it's not like the performer's place necessarily to say what that is. I experienced that in like my juggling solos, where it's like, nobody's laughing, I'm doing it wrong. And realizing, okay, there's more emotions that are coming up, and everyone's perceiving that through their own lens and taking what they need from it. Maybe it's that laughter moment of play, or maybe it's like an inspirational moment. And so, yeah, in my mind, yeah, that's just kind of where my brain went with that. As far as like laughter specifically, I think just, yeah, remembering that exists and that we have that place in us at times.
Facebook Live audience, thank you for being here. Leora and Josie and Eric, who's off to other things. thank you so much. We right now are unable to leave our houses, but that doesn't mean we're any less committed to doing our work, to being clowns, to figuring out what that means.